So I hate to be the news, but I think it is now abundantly clear that AI is directly impacting both job loss and new job creation across most developed nations in the world. The United States just announced about 110,000 layoffs for the month of January. And the most interesting part of all this to me is they announced only around 5,000 new jobs planned. That is a ratio of less than 1 in 20 new jobs created to old jobs lost. This is like South Korean levels of decline here. It is friggin' white collar genocide. And it's bad for people out in America, predominantly because it's probably one of the highest labor productivity countries on earth. And then it's also one of the least regulated economies on earth. But if you think this is happening just in America, oh boy, partner, buckle up because y'all got another thing coming. Now, this particular headline was the highest number of job losses in a January all the way back to 2009. I think it was also the lowest number of new jobs planned for basically the entirety since these guys have been tracking. And I bring it up because it's indicative of where all of this stuff is going. Like, we do not have much time left as, white collar knowledge workers. The reality is models nowadays are basically better than us at everything. And I don't mean to say that this is some far-flung science fiction future idea. When's the last time that you ever did an international math Olympiad problem? Probably never, right? Well, models are now capable of doing these sorts of things in minutes. How about solving these super complex air dust problems? These things are basically the summation, or maybe even like the multiplication of all knowledge that all humans have ever generated over the course of our lives up until now, at least knowledge that is directly indexable. So it's not surprising that like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, or whatever freaking quote you want to throw at. So why am I bitching about this as somebody that, owns my own business? And I'd imagine a big chunk of the people that watch my channel also own their own businesses, right? I talk about AI, automation, and starting a new agency and all that stuff. A while ago, I made the decision to run my own business because I figured that it would make more sense for my salary not to come from one person, but 100 people. Because obviously, if it comes from 100 people, it's a lot safer than if it comes from one person. If you lose your employer, that's 100% of your revenue, right? If you lose 1 out of 100 of your clients, that's 1% of your revenue. Well, the reason I'm talking about this is because this is not just going to impact people with full-time employment or people that are in the traditional 9-to-5 sort of lane, but everybody on earth. And really, what all of this points towards is mass unemployment. The stark reality is models are already better than humans at most economically valuable work. It sucks for me to say, I kind of get goosebumps every time I approach this sort of like blind spot in my own vision. But I think this is going to hit a lot of people very, very quickly. And so I might as well just share with you guys my own thoughts on that now. Like, when's the last time you guys coded in 30 different languages? I could code in maybe 0.5. Well, can you summarize 1,000 research papers in 15 minutes and then interpolate the results? I certainly freaking can't. These things have evolved past tools, and they are now essentially capable of co-working with us on most economically valuable tasks at time horizons up to like 3, 4, even 5 hours. So, I mean, like, it's not a question of if these things are better than us at most things. It's a question of how much better, and also how much better they are going to be over the coming years as the exponential takeoff and exponential improvement in technology continues. Anybody that's making a lot of money in this space treats it as a given. Why do you think all these freaking billionaires in AI all own their own islands and compounds and bunkers? Well, let me tell you, not all of them are doing Jeffrey Epstein level hijinks in there. Most of them are doing so because they foresee a future of mass unemployment and civil instability coming so quick and so fast that there's no other way to prepare for this other than getting themselves a nuclear silo a decade ago and stockpiling it with everything. This is not like a conspiracy theory, and I don't mean to worry people about this. Obviously, that's just one of many possible outcomes. But the civil instability that we're probably going to see as a result of increasing unemployment is going to be bigger and worse than anything I think anybody could have ever seen before. And I mean, like, the core of this is that AI is not like a factory machine, right? This is not the Industrial Revolution, despite the fact that many people like to draw parallels between it. In the Industrial Revolution, if I was, some fella creating, hand woven baskets or whatnot, and then some other fella invented a machine which hand wove the hell out of those baskets much better than I, there was a future for me, right? I might not be weaving the baskets directly, but maybe now what I'm doing is I'm overseeing the weaving of baskets in this factory. And that was sort of the progression, right? We increase the leverage, we increase the levels of abstraction at which we do the thing. And, in that way, we get a flourishing economy. People still have jobs and so on and so forth. We just output more. Well, AI is not like that, because with AI, it's like, let's say my core thing is I program computers, right? I make scripts for some backend thing. And then, it's like, oh, AI can now do that. So I'm just going to oversee the AI. Well, guess what? Um, AI is also better at overseeing the AI than you are. So what do? You take a step back and you think, well, I'm just going to orchestrate a bunch of AIs all acting in harmony. Well, guess what? AI is better at orchestrating other AIs who manage other AIs than you are as well. At a certain point, it's like, where is our economic value? The biological substrate of our brains operates at like 1,000th the speed at which electricity travels through a wire. There is just no feasible situation in which most humans will have any sort of economically valuable objective work that we can do better than AI models. And I'd go as far as to say that like we're almost at that point already. Obviously, there's the physical world to think about, and so there's a big push towards robotics and that sort of thing. And I think that's going to buy us some more time, essentially, in the current economic framework. But yeah, man, it is not looking good out there for most white collar workers. And being somebody in a knowledge field, being somebody that produces white collar deliverables and widgets and outputs, this is something that I've had to come to terms with over the last little while. So if I circle back to this idea of mass unemployment, I think if we were being honest with ourselves, this whole idea of mass unemployment is not actually bad. Like, if you think about it, the theoretical goal of civilization should be to get us to 100% unemployment. Why? Because in the perfect world, in the space utopia, everybody would just do whatever we want to do. We would work, based off passion and hopes and dreams, not necessarily work to live, not necessarily create these deliverables and widgets because we need to balance our checkbook at the end of the month, right? And whether or not you even want to define that as work, I don't even know if that word is going to make sense in our future. But the reality is, despite this being such an amazing goal for us to strive towards, everybody being able to do things and not having to worry about actual sustenance, us living in this fantastic post-scarcity society where AI manages the production and more or less the evolution and continued progression of technology, despite that being what I would consider to be a very good goal, like our current economic system is just not properly equipped to handle any of that. And this is the part at which, I shy away from talking about stuff like this because, logically speaking, because immediately everybody's minds just goes towards like communism and these alternative economic systems, which have been proven to be significantly inferior to, free market capitalism over much of the last 200 or so years. And, I'm not going to sit here and glorify, like socialist style or communist style economies. My parents fled from like the Soviet bloc 40 something years ago or so in search of a better life. And so I'm very familiar with all of the misgivings of that sort of system, at least the way that it was practically implemented. But if you consider what happens when unemployment rises and people are unable to pay bills in an economic environment, there really is no other alternative than some fundamental shift in the way that we compensate or pay human beings. We need to find a way to divorce payments from economic value, because if not, then the only things that will get any of future payments are models that are increasingly intelligent, more sophisticated, and better at managing transactions and objectively generating value than human beings are. It just doesn't really make any sense, right? In a world where you have $100 to spend and an AI agent is capable of giving you 1,000 products at the same level, whereas a human being is capable of giving you one product for that $100, who are you going to pay? I mean, it's classic game theory. Obviously, the optimal move is to pay for the most product with the least amount of money, right? And that's how the economy works. The entire economy is built on like a consumption loop, right? People will work, then they will earn a bunch of money, and then they will spend a bunch of money. Businesses will make that money. They'll then hire people who then work, and it's just cyclical. But when you remove the whole people work aspect of that loop, everything breaks down. And so this free market capitalism idea, despite the fact that I think it's currently the superior system, can't really continue in the same vein. So just to throw some numbers at you, the US economy is somewhere between 150 to 200 million employed people. I've heard various stats here, like 140 million, 160 million. I think it depends on like how you interpret the data and whatnot, which I'm not necessarily going to do. So let's just earmark it as 150 million. Major AI consulting firms estimate that between 30 to 50% of current economically valuable work, given the fact that the United States is primarily like a consulting knowledge sector economy, 30 to 50% of this work can be outsourced. If we take even a very conservative view, 30% of 150 million is like let's just say it's like between 40 to 50 million. If over the course of the next 10 years, we displace 40 to 50 million people, and then we generate jobs at a rate of approximately 1/20th, like we did in January, which I think is honestly a very high estimate. I think it's going to be much, much lower than that, probably 1 in 100. But that means that we're losing 50 million jobs, and then we're gaining, 2.5 million jobs approximately, right? So total unemployment goes up at 47.5 million, or about 4 million a year. Historically speaking, if you look at any period of time in which employment has gotten to that point, not even total employment, mind you, usually youth employment, people between, the ages of like 20 to maybe like 35 or so. If you look historically at any period of time in which unemployment has racketed up to that level, you basically almost always have like atrocious Geneva Convention breaking level violence. You have total breakdown of the civil structure. You have people doing things that they would have considered animalistic just a couple of years ago. Like look at the Arab Spring. In Tunisia, I think youth unemployment was like 25% or so. Didn't even hit 30%. When Bouazizi set himself on fire and then, more or less pushed through this massive revolution. People are doing things that they could not have even believed that they would be doing just a few months prior to that. But obviously you have to do what you have to do in order to survive. We have a big group of people that don't believe they have any upward mobility, which I think is a very possible outcome of, the AI economy class. Why do anything if models can do things 100,000 times better than you and 100,000 times cheaper, right? I consider myself to have thought about this problem for a very long time, and that demotivates and demoralizes the hell out of me. What about somebody that's like realizing this for the first time? It's going to be crazy. What about, Weimar Germany back in the 30s? Unemployment was about between 20 to 30%, immediately preceding the voting in of the Nazi party. And we all know how that ended. Anytime you have like a big mass of people who just can't make ends meet, there's like a 1-to-1 correlation between that and then like the voting in of people that would be considered quite politically extreme just a few years prior. But the reality is people don't give a shit about like political extremism. They care about putting, food on their table, feeding their families, and just making ends meet. And, I'm sure a big chunk of the people that voted for Mr. Hitler, a big chunk of the people that voted for this freaking genocidal maniac, they weren't bad people. They just saw him promising a bunch of solutions to problems that they were suffering from. And they said, well, better him than whatever else. Better him than what we're currently experiencing. Better, the grass on the other side of the fence than the grass over here. We see this already, right? We have political polarization at levels that we haven't seen in several decades. We have people voting in what just a few years ago we would have considered to be the most uncouth, violent maniacs ever. And then they do so with like their fists in the air, and they're really, really stoked about it because, of the promise of my own personal burdens being alleviated. It's not like a theory at this point. It's a very clear and austere political pattern. So, I'm not going to sit here and say that the end of the world is coming or whatever, but I do think, and I would agree with a lot of other thinkers in AI and whatnot, that most likely what's coming is a period of mass civil instability following increasing job loss and increasing automation of things like white-collar work. That mass civil instability is what's going to inevitably and eventually push us towards adopting some sort of new economic system where human compensation is more divorced from the direct economic value that we provide. I'm not, Nostradamus, but I don't think it takes Nostradamus to make this sort of claim. I think it's the same sort of thing we've seen secularly occur throughout history, and AI is really just increasing the pace of that development. Now, I think if we can make it out to the other side of this, terrible thread the eye of the needle sort of situation, I think that boundless and limitless growth and prosperity will exist for everybody. But I think that it's going to be very difficult to do so. And there are a lot of people, actors, and forces out there that are constantly pushing us away from the eye of that needle. So what would an economic system like that actually look like? A lot of people have talked about universal basic income, which is sort of the idea that you just get paid for existing. And there have been a lot of studies on things like universal basic income, and they have unfortunately definitively shown that people tend to, they tend to lose motivation. They tend to do significantly less. Their job satisfaction, life satisfaction, just in general satisfaction tends to go down when somebody pays for all of their needs. I think a big chunk of that is sort of like the same thing that underlies a big chunk of modern like depression and, I don't know, the pandemic of mental illness, if that's what you want to call it, although I think all that stuff is hyped up. When you free people up to think more about their situation, there is unfortunately like a negative bias in the human brain. And so the more time we have available to consider our situation and think things like the deep meaning of life questions and what the hell I want to do, typically speaking, the outcome of that is negative rather than positive. And there are a variety of reasons for this. As somebody that went to school for behavioral neuroscience, I think the main one is just that the human brain wasn't wired to sit around thinking all day. It was wired to get you to reproduce. And so if you are sitting around all day, presumably not reproducing, the brain will try and get you to do everything humanly possible to get out there and get that quick fix or quick hit of dopamine. And a lot of the time that involves you just feeling quite poorly. I think future technology can help with that. But, that's one of the major caveats of the UBI proposals that are being pushed out, I think. I think another possible system is one where people get compensated for something that is analogous to economic productivity, but it is not economic productivity. And I'd encourage you guys that don't understand what I mean to think about this. Like 20,000 years ago, you're like a hunter-gatherer, on the plains, and you're hunting buffalo or whatever the hell you're doing. I don't know. I don't actually know if 20,000 years ago they were hunting buffalo. I think they were. I went to a museum once. But anyway, all of a sudden a little time machine opens up and somebody grabs you and puts you in like a modern cubicle. And somebody explains to you like, hey, this is how people get paid now. What are you going to think? You're a hunter-gatherer. You're going to look around and you're going to be like, where's the hunting? Where's the gathering? I don't see you providing. Where's the food here, guys? Right? These are all bullshit jobs. Why are you spending 8 hours sitting down? You're not doing anything that's actually valuable. Well, the current economic paradigm back then was obviously like, most of it was sustenance-based. Same thing with like the agrarian economies of 10,000 years or 20,000 years after that. You pick a farmer up and you put them in front of me here recording my video, and they're gonna be like, "What the hell are you doing? You're just talking into a camera, you dolt! Like, go do something valuable. Go plant some freaking seeds." Funnily enough, my dad is still kind of like that because he grew up on a farm. Like, what are you doing? You're just twiddling your thumbs in front of your computer. Go do some real work. Here's a hammer. But if you do that with somebody today, and then you transport them into a post-AGI future, where we're in that post-scarcity economy, guarantee you what we're going to do is we're probably going to think that that's a bullshit job as well. So the question is, what are those bullshit jobs? Like, what are those things that people will do that are side by side with economic productivity, but not necessarily the same thing? Like, what would I consider to objectively be something that improves economic productivity? Well, that'd be like research, right? That would be like, natural resource extraction. That would be like building infrastructure, building roads, stuff like that. These things objectively improve like our ability to grow, GDP and then human prosperity. What would I consider something that is maybe analogous to that? Well, maybe some sort of like credit-based system where human beings reward each other for, I don't know, displays of some value that human beings hold really dear, courage, bravery, something like that. I think like streaming culture and stuff like that is actually kind of analogous to that. Like what the hell are streamers doing? A lot of the time they just strap a camera on some fella and then walk around. Look at Speed, right? This big streamer guy. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he keeps on coming up my damn feed. He's just making reaction faces and doing backflips. He's being funny. He's I don't know. He's satisfying some visceral need for human connection. A future economy could look like that. And so in addition to having our base needs met, there might be some additional credit-based thing where people get paid for stuff like that, which I think would be far better than UBI because it would still give people at least some sense of, working towards something. I think progress is really important. Some sort of AI productivity tax like Bernie Sanders has talked quite a bit about is possible, although obviously that's more UBI-based. There are a variety of ways that I think we could build in systems to still provide people a reasonable amount of autonomy, freedom, but also meaning that still make us, capable of putting food on our table, feeding our family, and just not wanting to jump off a freaking bridge every 5 seconds because we feel like our lives are listless and directionless. But I don't really know what that's going to look like. And to be honest, that is all contingent on whether or not we make it through the eye of that needle that I'm talking about with mass civil instability and so on and so forth, likely on the horizon. So yeah, why am I making this video? Just because I wanted to talk to somebody about it, I suppose. And because I think I've probably spent more time thinking about this than probably like 80 to 90% of my viewers, although I would not sit here and claim to have spent more time thinking about it than all of you because some of you are extraordinarily intelligent, extraordinarily introspective people. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I certainly know that it's going to be wildly different from today. Okay, so yeah, looking forward to seeing what those job loss stats are in the next few months. But I imagine it's going to be more of what we're seeing today.